What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I'm Colin Newby of 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR, coming to you weekly with Philly Sports Talk. We're in the middle of March here. We got St. Patrick's Day coming up, and in about 2 weeks from Phillies opening day down in Washington, D.C., also got the Dodgers and the Cubs over in Tokyo on March 18th and 19th. Nothing like a little 6 a.m. first pitch on the East Coast to start the MLB season. But I want to go through each of the Phillies position group previews leading into MLB opening day the next couple weeks. And I'm doing lists on 975thefanatic.com. Starting pitchers came out this week, and I'm going to start with them and then close on a topic I teased last week with the Phillies. That's about Trey Turner and Kyle Schwarber rotating in the leadoff spot. Then after the break, I'll get to some Flyers talk. But let's go with the starting pitchers. This is one of the best rotations in the majors. You got Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, Christopher Sanchez, Jesus Luzardo, and Ranger Suarez. Is this the best starting rotation in Major League Baseball? I think it might be. It's hard to look past the LA Dodgers. They've really got 7 guys good enough to be in a starting rotation and not just pitch in a rotation, but be very good contributors. But if you look at where these guys are at in time, Tony Gonsolin is already struggling with availability. They don't know if he'll be ready for opening day. And then you got Ohtani coming off injury, didn't pitch last year. Tyler Glasnow, who's never really had the best durability, very ironic name, Glasnow. And then Dustin May, he's coming off a major injury too. So the Dodgers have a little bit more of a question mark than the Phillies, I think, even though they probably have more talent in their starting rotation. After that, you also have the Seattle Mariners. They got Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, George Kirby. But I think the Phillies are right up there because they have these 4 and 5 guys. It's not a determined order, by the way, but I'm talking about rotation depth. They have guys at the bottom who are going to pitch in these 4 and 5 spots that could probably be towards the top of most MLB rotations. And then I don't want to move on without mentioning the Atlanta Braves, especially with Spencer Strider back on the mound. And the Tampa Bay Rays I hear a lot of talk about too in spring training. We'll see what they can do this season. But I ranked the Philly starting pitchers on 975thefanatic.com based on intrigue. And remember back a couple weeks, my friend Bob Cooney coming on to talk Joel Embiid and some Sixers. We had a little conversation about the most intriguing people we've ever covered. So I decided, instead of ranking this starting rotation in the order that they'll probably pitch in, with Zach Wheeler on opening day, I'm sure Aaron Nola will be second. Why don't I rank them 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 based on the level of intrigue that I have entering the 2025 season? If you want to check this out, I'll put the link in the show notes, but the article has a lot of charts in there, giving you some statistics, searching through StatCast, Fangraphs, all these sites, Baseball Reference too. But the charts are pretty informative, at least from my perspective. And then this list also starts at number 5 and goes down. I'm actually going to start at number 1 on the show, and that's Ranger Suarez, a guy maybe you didn't expect me to put number 1, but I have my eyes on him, and I've talked about this towards the end of last season and also during the offseason because I suspected he might get traded before opening day. Doesn't look like that's going to happen, but Ranger is my most intriguing of the 5 guys who are projected to be in the rotation. Why? Because this is a very impactful crossroad of his career. Ranger's 29 now, and he doesn't have a reliable track record of durability. That's what earns starting pitchers money at the top of the market. And Ranger's in his last year of club control. Are the Phillies going to re-sign him to a long-term contract after the season? Think about what's happened within the past calendar year. Dave Dombrowski and the Phillies have never prioritized extending Ranger Suarez. Instead, there's plenty of indicators otherwise. They've extended Christopher Sanchez, who's his younger teammate. Last trade deadline, they chased down Garrett Crochet and offered a huge package of prospects to the White Sox before he eventually went to Boston in the offseason. Phillies also traded for Jesus Luzardo back in December. They're putting full confidence in Andrew Painter, one of the top prospects in the organization, as a key part of the future. Where does that leave Ranger Suarez? I don't think it's in the best position, because if you think about it, this guy's had a very unusual career arc in the majors. Think back to 2021. He had that dominant stint in the bullpen, especially in the first half of the season, and that got him into the rotation later in the season, at least his firm spot in the rotation. His only real full season as a starter was in 2022. He pitched 155 and a third innings, but that was mostly short outings, and it's the only time when he didn't miss an extended period in a single regular season. Then in 2023, he had a weird start. He had visa issues that pushed back his spring training, and then an injury that pushed his start of the regular season all the way back to May 13th. The best example of what I'm talking about with Ranger Suarez, too, came last season in 2024. He was absolutely outstanding in the first half. His first 16 starts through July 1st, he had a 1.83 ERA. In the second half, 11 starts, 6.54 ERA. He lost confidence in himself down the stretch, and Ricky Bottalico spoke in September about how Suarez's mechanics were just completely off going into the postseason.
Let me put it this way. As a pitcher, you use your legs all the time. You watched him last night, he wasn't pushing off, he wasn't driving off of his legs, he was just throwing all upper body. When you do that, it's going to be flat in his zone, it's going to be slower. He didn't hit any of his, actually everything was wrong.
Now, Ranger's a fan favorite in Philadelphia. He's cool and calm on the mound. He's very competitive in the same sense that a guy like Zach Wheeler is, but he's also got that composure that people love Cliff Lee for. And when he's on, I think Suarez is as good as anybody. But if he doesn't have a long-term future with the Phillies, then Dave Dombrowski has a major decision to make. This team's in World Series contention entering 2025, sure, but there's difficult decisions at play here. If Ranger Suarez is going to walk in free agency after the 2025 season, then you've got a decision to make at the trade deadline. And now Dombrowski showed last season that he's willing to move contributors off the roster. He traded Seranthony Dominguez and Gregory Soto, remaking that whole bullpen. Sent those guys to the Orioles in July when he brought over Carlos Estevez from the Rangers too. So there's a little bit of precedent there to move a contributing big leaguer off the roster. And remember, Andrew Painter is supposed to come up to the Phillies around July. At least that's a target date. There's a lot to be determined between now and July. But it's not out of the question that Ranger gets moved during the season this year. Now, reports out of spring training are that he's ramping up a little bit differently than he has in the past. Remember last year in March when Rob Thompson and other key members of the organization, they kept emphasizing getting off to a better start. The previous two seasons, they made the playoffs as a wild card and kind of got hot at the right time, but they wanted to contend for the division. They did that, got off to that crazy start in the early months, built a big lead, but kind of coasted in the second half. I think that they want to find the happy medium this season, and part of that would be to ease Ranger Suarez in. Maybe he doesn't get off to the crazy start that he did last year, where he's one of the best pitchers in the majors in the first half, but that ultimately plays a long-term benefit. So we'll see how his durability fares early in the season leading up to the trade deadline and how effective he is. Because the Phillies are going to ride Wheeler and Nola and really this whole rotation over the 162-game regular season, try to win the NL East. But none of these guys, none of the other ones at least, Luzardo, Sanchez, Wheeler, or Nola, have as much variance in outcome or as much intrigue as Ranger Suarez coming into 2025. So that's my first guy. And it takes a lot to beat the next guy on this list. That's Zach Wheeler. And I just really enjoy watching this guy pitch overall. His competitive demeanor is absolutely outstanding. He's methodical. He's a creature of habit. Listen to an interview with him. It was on the Phillies show a couple of weeks ago. And he's just talking about his preparation, his mentality when he's out on the mound. And I know Buster Olney of ESPN ranks the best at each position entering a season. Well, it's the age-old barroom question. If you're in a hypothetical Game 7 of the World Series, who do you want on the mound? Buster Olney chose Zach Wheeler, and I think that was the right choice. And when you're looking at the top of the majors, you've got bias on the guys that you cover on a regular basis. So I have to come out and admit that right away. But the chart I included for Zach Wheeler in the 97.5 The Fanatic article is his ranks among MLB pitchers last season. ERA, third. WHIP, third. Opponent batting average, second. Strikeouts, third. Innings pitched, fourth. Wins, third. FIP, eighth. This guy was at the top in almost every major category. Zach Wheeler has a great fastball. He usually averages around 96, depending on the season, but he's not the most overpowering pitcher in the league. I think he thinks the game, and that's something that Ricky shared with me and a lot of times on the Fanatic or Phillies postgame, wherever you want to catch his work. One thing I wanted to point out about Zach Wheeler, though, the Phillies didn't make the offseason splash that a lot of people thought they were going to, but that doesn't mean they didn't make a significant financial investment coming into this season. It's just the timing of it all. Zach Wheeler signed the contract entering the 2024 season that's going to get him $42 million annually on the new contract that starts this year. Only Juan Soto is going to have a higher salary among big league players, and Zach Wheeler, if he pitches the way he has since he came to the Phillies entering 2020, that deal's going to be worth every penny. He's done it in the regular season. He's done it in Red October. He's got a 2.18 ERA, and that's in about 70 career postseason innings. And his durability has been excellent. I know Chris Sale won the National League Cy Young last year. I thought that was a mistake. I thought Zach Wheeler was the best pitcher in the National League. He also probably should have won the Cy Young a few years ago just because his level of durability is better than the other guys at the top of the league. Moving on to the third guy, it's Jesus Luzardo, the new guy. The Phillies sent a couple prospects, Starlin Caba and Marion Boyd, down to Miami to kind of fulfill this puzzle, the last piece of this rotation that's going to enter the season as the Phillies' greatest strength. Now, Luzardo pitched his last game in 2024 on June 16th. It was a lumbar stress reaction. That's right in the shoulder area. Jesus Luzardo struggled with health through the early part of the season before he went on the shelf too. And he spoke pretty confidently about that after the trade in December about entering spring training healthy. And he proved that in his first start down in the Grapefruit League. He pitched 2 perfect innings, had 2 Ks, and they were both on the changeup. And the changeup is what's kept hitters off balance in Luzardo's best seasons with Miami. And he's also had a tick up on his fastball velocity down in spring training. Second start didn't go so smoothly. I actually laughed when I saw this. Rob Thompson was in the middle of an interview with ESPN. This is an in-game interview. Jesus Luzardo gets drilled for 3 home runs on 3 consecutive pitches. That was against the Tigers. But I think this guy has a lot of strikeout stuff. He's ranked near the top of the majors in strikeout rate and whiff rate during his best seasons. And his fastball velocity down in spring training is a very encouraging sign for his health entering the season, because that velocity in 2023 and 22, those were his best seasons, was a little bit higher than it was last year. He seems to think that was because of the injury. So all indicators pretty good on Luzardo, at least for now. We'll see how he stays healthy and how he gets into a rhythm now that he's come to Philadelphia this season. Fourth guy on my list, Christopher Sanchez, and he's a guy who's been praised during spring training. I guess he bulked up during off-season workouts, and that's added a little velocity for him too. He throws that sinking fastball, if you will. He's put a little speed on, and he comes into the season at age 28 now, and he signed that new contract in June of last year, so this will be the first season on it. But he's had 49 starts over the last 2 seasons. He got named as a full-time starter in the rotation mid-season in 2023, but he's got a 3.36 ERA over 49 starts, and I think that's enough of a sample size to say that this guy is a middle-of-the-rotation pitcher on a great staff like the Phillies, and he could probably be a top-of-the-rotation pitcher on an MLB team that isn't as loaded with Zach Wheeler or Aaron Nola. What sticks out to me about Christopher Sanchez is the top of his game. I remember 2 performances at Citizens Bank Park in particular last season. Sanchez's only 2 complete games of the year. He was just absolutely mowing guys down, and these were weekend sets at the ballpark in front of big crowds. And I think that's part of the reason why Rob Thompson wanted him to pitch at home in the NLDS, is because he kind of fed off that environment. Sanchez really impressed me last year, and I think entering this season, he's just another link of this starting rotation that should be able to carry the Phillies. One more thing before I move on from him. Jason Stark talked on The Fanatic and described how Sanchez might have the best changeup in the majors. Imagine if you told somebody that a couple of years ago, that a respected reporter like Jason Stark would say that Christopher Sanchez might have the best changeup in baseball. It's pretty amazing how far this guy's come. The last guy on my list is a total snub. He's the most underappreciated athlete in Philadelphia sports. Aaron Nola is actually the perfect representative of the 2025 Phillies. Why? Because this team doesn't have that much spring training buzz, and the reason for it is because expected success is actually kind of boring. There's not that much sizzle. You're not going to land on the sports talk radio shows for expected success without much drama, without many new additions, for putting your head down and going to work, and I think that's this team's best chance to win a World Series. But their disappointing playoff exits the last couple years have kind of overshadowed the success of Aaron Nola and other consistent pitchers on this staff. Nola's one of the best pitchers in Phillies history, and if you look back to his breakout season in 2018, where he finished third in NL Cy Young voting, Nola leads all MLB pitchers in starts and innings pitched over that span. Now, that's not the entire necessary context to the statement. You also have to look at the fact that he's 46th over that time span in ERA, and I'm speaking among 167 qualified starting pitchers, made the cutoff at 400 innings when I filtered the stat. So I don't look at Aaron Nola as a staff ace. He's only been an all-star once in his career, but he really is as reliable as starting pitchers come. And this is a modern era where workloads are just lessening and lessening. One thing you do have to worry about, and this applies to Nola and Zach Wheeler, these guys have pitched at the top of the majors for a long time now. If you cut it when Zach Wheeler signed with the Phillies in 2020, they rank 1-2 in the majors in innings pitched. And also starts, Aaron Nola ranks second, Wheeler ranks 10th. So there's a ton of wear and tear on these guys. And Nola is entering his age 32 season locked up all the way through 2030. So you've got long-term money invested in these guys who have been workhorses, who have proven they can handle this heavy workload, but is durability a concern in that they wear down? That stuff's very hard to predict, but as these guys get older, it's something to think about within this organization. And there's plenty of talk about how the World Series window is about to close. Well, that's one thing to consider when you look at Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler at the top of this Phillies rotation. One more quick topic before we move on to Flyers talk. I wanted to mention Trey Turner probably hitting in the leadoff spot this year. And this annual conversation about batting order, it really brings out the worst in people for some reason. Part of it is because the Phillies have like the most extreme example you're going to find in an MLB player. It's a microcosm of transitioning into different styles in the modern game, I believe. Kyle Schwarber, he's been a good leadoff hitter for the Phillies. He does not fit the traditional mold that people like to point to, especially on sports radio. People rant about this all the time. If you look back to 2023, he led the majors in strikeouts, and he didn't steal a single base all season. It drove people crazy, especially with hitting 47 home runs. For some reason, people look at that as a bad thing, by the way. It's not a bad thing. But point being, he doesn't fit the mold of a traditional leadoff hitter. But I look at batting order in a much different light than these sports radio shows do, and so does Rob Thompson. He's openly talked about this on the record, and I've always found it very interesting. Players reaching a comfort level in a spot can outweigh the need to optimize batting order, which isn't as big of a focus as it used to be. Thank the sabermetrics for that one. But with the comfort level that I'm talking about, the Phillies might weaponize it a little bit differently this year, the same way they've done it with Kyle Schwarber in past years, and it's kind of based off the premise that Kyle Schwarber was an old dog who learned some new tricks last year. He raised his batting average all the way into the 240s after hitting below the Mendoza line the previous season. In order to find out the context of this one, take a listen to what Matt Gelb said during the hit on the Fanatic from Clearwater just a few weeks ago.
This guy can be one of the best players in the sport. We've seen it. We know it. He's done it before. They need him to be better. I mean, this is a guy they're paying a lot of money. I think he's one of the keys of this season, and I do think he's going to bat lead off. Listening to Kevin Long sort of talk about some of the thinking behind it, I tend to agree with him. I think that their idea is by putting Turner at the top, it's going to force him to think a little bit differently. And how often last year did we hear Turner say, especially after the hamstring injury, which cost him 6 weeks, what was a significant injury? How often did we hear him say, I'm not trying to be stupid. I'm not trying to push it necessarily into bases. I'm trying to make sure I'm staying healthy for the entire season. And I feel like we saw some of that athleticism and that electricity to his game. We just didn't see it as much last year.
If Kyle Schwarber learned some new things later in his career as a veteran hitter, why can't Trey Turner do the same? I mean, Turner led the team in batting average last season. I realized that. He was also third in on base, and he was really good for long stretches, especially at the beginning of the year. And he did have that injury in the middle there, kind of slowed down his momentum. But I thought he made a lot of mistakes at the plate. And by the end, he was part of that problem, this free swinging issue that everyone loves to talk about. He got a little bit pull happy last year, maybe swinging a little too much for power. And at the end, especially in the playoffs, I didn't love his approach at the plate. He was also in the bottom 16th percentile of MLB hitters in chase rate. That's a big focus, at least outside the organization it has been. Inside the organization, they've gone a little deeper than just looking at raw chase rate. But Trey Turner, he needs to be more selective at the plate. He needs to take a smarter approach than he did last season if he's going to live up to that $300 million contract that he got a couple of years ago. And who better to look at than the clubhouse leader, Kyle Schwarber, who kept that signature short stroke last year. His power numbers didn't really dip, minor dip in home runs, but he still made hard contact as consistently as anyone and hit plenty of home runs. I think he had 38 last season. But Turner could certainly use some of that same medicine. I like the idea of putting Trey Turner in the leadoff spot. It's a thought outside the box, and it's something that the Phillies should welcome when they're running back majority of the same guys from the last few seasons and expecting different results. Let's get to some Flyers talk after the break.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time, and I'm going to jump right into a topic that's probably overdue for some of the listeners. At the beginning of the Flyers season, I talked about doing some digging into the John Tortorella healthy scratch, which he seemed to use as his go-to easy button for challenging players in the last couple of seasons. The biggest storyline of this year, which has been a pretty forgettable one in Flyers history, is the dynamic between Tortorella and Matvei Mishkov. Now, he scratched Mishkov back towards the beginning of the season. It was 2 games, one in Florida, one in Tampa. And then he's also benched him a couple of times more recently. And the most recent one was Saturday at the Wells Fargo Center when they played the Seattle Kraken. But benching him for, I think it was the final 9 minutes of the first period, and then Mishkov also started the second, that wasn't the biggest story. It was what John Tortorella said after the game.
A few weeks ago when you sat him for the rest of the game and you had said that in retrospect you would have put him back.
Just let me tell you guys something, okay? There are a number of things that come into play, not one specific play, okay? And you are at a disadvantage because I'm not going to give you information. It's not always the play on the ice that I'm trying to teach. So use that as a context before you start all your bullshit. There are so many things that go on, and with me trying to develop that player, and I'm going to continue to do it the way I think it should be done, but don't just look at the play. No, he didn't do the job as far as back checking. No, he didn't do the job in the offense zone, but there are a number of other things that come into play. And again, I need to show you the respect that I'm not going to give you that information, and you don't realize that.
So he just made it pretty obvious this is not really about defensive mistakes. All the guys on the ice make defensive mistakes at one point or another. And I hear people arguing this, say, Why doesn't Ryan Poehling get benched for a defensive mistake? Why doesn't Travis Konechny get benched for a defensive mistake? John Tortorella means to point out here that it's not just that mistake. Always a lively conversation with the head coach of the Flyers. Use that as context before you start all your BS. That man's got some interesting psychology going on in his head, as I also talked about with Bob a couple of weeks ago. But I've had pretty much the same outlook on this Michkov-Tortorella thing the whole season. Danny Briere even said it going into the year that this was his expectation, that there was going to be some fireworks between Tortorella and Michkov, and that he even wanted it. He welcomed it as a way to shape Michkov coming into the league. But Matvei Michkov is just the most obvious and scrutinized example of this. From what I've gathered, and I've tried to ask as many times as I can throughout the year, Cam York is also a victim to it this week. He got benched over the weekend, and then there's some trouble coming out of Voorhees. The reporters, and I was not at practice when this happened, but the reporters asked him what the communication was like with Tortorella on the healthy scratch. He didn't have good things to say. He thinks that's confusing, that he doesn't think he's playing that poorly, and that Tortorella hasn't really communicated to him what he needs to improve on the ice to get back in good standing. From the guys I've asked, other than Cam York, I think that the players see this as a mode of discipline and a mode of challenge. And if you read into John Tortorella's words, I think he said as much. I want to play some audio from Bobby Brink first. And Brink is a player who's gotten into much better standing through his improvement during his time with the Flyers. But he had been healthy scratched at certain points, especially last season. He went through longer points when he wasn't in the NHL lineup, and he's kind of become a regular this year. I asked him about being a healthy scratch. Take a listen. Just thinking with the way the lineup's gone this year, you guys have been rotating in and out. In the times that you've been a healthy scratch, what do you think as a younger guy you've learned from the experience?
Can't have a game off or else might not be in the lineup the next day. Got to show up every day and get better.
You think watching from the press box, just when the game's maybe slowed down a little bit, that helps you just kind of see the game in a different light?
I mean, you can sit there and try to take in stuff, but I feel like everyone's a good player and everyone kind of knows what's open usually in a game. But yeah, it's definitely good to get up there and see what it looks like.
So just in a competitive drive, you feel like you'd rather learn from being on the ice?
I mean, no one ever wants to be scratched. Right. I think it definitely isn't a good feeling, and I think every guy would rather be in the lineup every night.
I think you're probably able to conclude from that audio that Bobby Brink isn't a particular fan of the healthy scratch. It goes against the competitive juices of professional athletes. Now, Brink has made some improvements and been a key part of that line with Noah Cates and Tyson Forster, the line that's getting all kinds of praise from the coaching staff, from Danny Briere, and Tortorella's also complimented Brink's all-around game and how he's developed. He really struggled as a smaller player with the physical aspects of the game when he first came up to the NHL, but he's improved in that this year also, and having the line mates Tyson Forster and Noah Cates, who tend to drive play the other way, that's helped him develop into more of a complete player. I want to contrast Bobby Brink with another player who never really got along. I shouldn't say got along because I don't know if this was a personal thing. I don't know their personal relationship. But a player who never really got into the good graces of John Tortorella. And guess what? He's not on the team anymore. Take a listen to what Morgan Frost had to say about being a healthy scratch when I asked him. This was back in December. Here's Morgan Frost. The way the lineup's gone really the past couple of years, and Emil just came out also. Asking some of the younger guys, what do you see when you are a healthy scratch? Do you think that you gain anything from being in the press box?
I think, if you're watching from up top, you can kind of see the game. It definitely looks slower when you're watching versus when you're on the ice.
Yeah.
So I think you can do that. The way I've always treated it is kind of just as a mental reset. So, I don't know. I don't know if you can learn a ton. It's different watching.
Do you think it's any different watching film?
Yes, because it's in live time, and sometimes on TV it can look even slower. And if you're up top, you see the whole ice surface. Versus on TV, you can only see a certain amount, I would say. But everyone will be different.
Right. When you said mental reset, I just asked Bobby Brink the same thing. He said it kind of feels like maybe something to drive your competitive nature.
Yeah.
You ever see it that way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously you want to be playing, so when you're out, I think it can kind of light a fire under you when you get back in. And I think obviously you got adrenaline going when you come back in. You want to make an impact and stay in the lineup. So sometimes it can. I don't want to say you don't never want to come out of the lineup, but I think sometimes it can be a good reset.
So you hear Morgan Frost, who tends to speak pretty positively in general. So his attitude contrasts Bobby Brink a little bit in that Frost is just kind of a bright guy. I noticed that the entire time he was with the Flyers. He's usually smiling, and I think he's a little bit more sensitive. At least this is an initial impression. I don't want to give the listeners the impression that I know these guys personally. It's something that you pick up on from the occasional conversation when these guys are generous with their time, whether it's after a practice or after a game. I think they tend to be more closed off. But Frost was always open to conversation and pretty positive. Positive about being a healthy scratch, though? I don't know if that's the challenge or the way to respond to a challenge that John Tortorella is really looking for. He admitted in the most recent instance of the healthy scratch with Cam York that a couple years ago he was trying to pick a fight. Those were John Tortorella's words, trying to pick a fight by demoting Cam York to the AHL. He thought York responded to that. I'm willing to conclude with the Morgan Frost trade and the fact that he never really got on the good side of John Tortorella, that he didn't really respond the way his head coach wanted. Morgan Frost was a first-round pick who I don't think really hit his ceiling. I was never his biggest fan as a player, and I wasn't torn up to see him leave the organization when they made the trade. But think about the guy he went with, too. Joel Farabee. After only a couple weeks of being in Calgary, he took a shot at Tortorella to the Calgary media in a post-game availability. Do I love this John Tortorella approach altogether? Well, I know exactly what the organization likes about him, and I see what they've always wanted from him. When the new front office came in and started the rebuild under Danny Briere and Keith Jones, they felt they were missing their attitude, that they had lost something that always defines the Flyers. And that's a big part of the culture thing that they've talked about so much. And they put a lot of trust in him to restore that attitude. Danny Briere said on the record he's linked John Tortorella to maintaining the culture, doing it down on the ice. I've said on this show and in print that Tortorella is supposed to bring substance to the idea of culture. And when he's challenged players in the past, I think that it has been positive for their personal development. So the head coach has brought a lot of strengths in his time with the Flyers. But the disciplinarian thing, I think it's starting to wear on people. Is this his last year as the head coach? If my life depends on it and I need to answer one way or the other, I'm saying it is his last year as the head coach, and he transitions to another role within the organization. If that does happen, I will not crush Tortorella for the job he did with the Flyers. It might just be that these ideas have run their course. So when you see it with Matvei Mishkov, And this is a rookie with dynamic ability who could be a superstar in the future. Yes, but he's also got a lot left to learn. You heard Tortorella say it's not just what happened on the ice. He's trying to mold these guys, to challenge them, to have them take accountability off the ice. There was a spat a few weeks ago on the bench that led Tortorella to sit Mishkov. He expects players to take accountability for their mistakes, and that's part of what Briere was thinking about in saying that hard coaching will benefit Mishkov when he talked before the season. It's consistent with the things that Tortorella has done in his time with the Flyers. This is his third season as the head coach, his second under the new front office with Danny Briere and Keith Jones. But if the decision is ultimately made to move John Tortorella into the front office or whatever player development role at another point in the organization instead of the head coach, I think it is a major indicator of a new phase of the rebuild where the Flyers move away from defining culture and saying they want to restore their attitude. They might consider that attitude restored and try to keep him within the organization, Tortorella that is, within the organization so that they can maintain it. But that is the perfect segue into another storyline surrounding the Flyers, the Scott Laughton trade and the deals they made at the NHL trade deadline, something I covered on the show last week. But particularly with Laughton, he has been one of the most obvious examples of a guy they've kept around for culture. And there wasn't that much tangible evidence to what Laughton was doing for the culture. He doesn't score that much. He's a third-line player in the NHL at this point in his career. He's not going to be one of the top players on a Stanley Cup team. So why were the Flyers holding on to him if he could have gotten them back a significant trade package as part of the rebuild? Well, it was for that leadership cultural aspect. And the fact that the Flyers were willing to move on from that, I believe it's a major symbol of what I was just talking about with possibly a looming move of John Tortorella leaving the bench and joining the front office, that maybe the emphasis on culture is not going to be as big after this season as it has been in the past. The Flyers are almost definitely going to miss the playoffs for the fifth year in a row. Maybe they do decide to go for it with a major offseason splash, especially for a center. Danny Briere has said, I think it was in his midseason press conference, that the Flyers just have a glaring hole there. He admitted it, and that was also before they traded Morgan Frost, so that hole's even bigger right now. Flyers also traded Eric Johnson at the deadline, and that's something that I wanted to close the show on this week, because Laughton, he went to Toronto, and that's right near his hometown. That's Oakville, Ontario, but he was an OHL star, so has connections to the area. And also consider that he lost his father-in-law very suddenly. This was just a couple of months ago, and he's also the father of a newborn baby. So a guy that's been around the organization this long, he was drafted in 2012 and has earned as much respect as Scott Laughton has. Danny Briere did him sort of a favor by sending him back home. It's part of what the organization's looking to restore, this idea that the Flyers take care of their own people. And then there's another example of it with Eric Johnson. He goes back to the Colorado Avalanche, the place where he spent most of his pro career and the only town where he won a Stanley Cup during his time in the NHL. Todd Fedoruk and Tim Saunders talked about this on the 97.5 The Fanatic broadcast over the weekend. Take a listen to what the Fridge had to say.
Revisiting the news from yesterday, the Flyers sending Scott Laughton to the Toronto Maple Leafs for a first-round draft pick and the prospect that they think may turn into a player. Kuzmenko went to L.A. for a draft pick. Eric Johnson to Colorado for Giovanni Smith. Danny Briere, two of those moves are going to put Briere in good stead with players around the league. Guys are going to want to come here because of stuff like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, hockey's such a demanding sport. When you have a team that generally takes care of the man and they're just not an asset.
What I guess I'm getting
it's an attractive quality.
Yeah, well, Danny did Eric Johnson a favor just to give him a chance to win a cup. He kind of listened to what Lawton wanted. Even in the Lawton trade, agreeing to, and there's no doubt he had more than one offer for Scott Lawton, but sending him to Toronto where he's basically going home.
I mean, that's what, in hockey, that's what you define as a class organization. When you take those accounts of the player's life, their livelihood, where they're at in their career, and what they've done for that organization. Yeah, Scotty Lawton's been here a long time. He did tremendous things for this organization, and still did something good for them as he's going on into Toronto by leaving us with a first-round pick.
No matter how frustrated you get with the micro-level decisions that the Flyers make, these things with John Tortorella and Matvei Mishkov, remember that they are on the way back in that sense, what Todd Fedoruk was talking about, with restoring their reputation as a first-class organization in the NHL. That's as big of a part of the rebuild and as big of an advantage in free agency that the Flyers are going to find. And that's another thing that Todd has talked to me about during an interview that I did with him and Dan Hilferty Jr. a couple of months ago. That's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in, Philadelphia. I'll be back next week on First Time, Long Time.